World Ski Orienteering Championships, and I think Josh Eaton, who's there together with Tamara and also Chris and Lauren will lead on this. So Josh, over to you in Japan. Good morning. How are things doing there?
Things are good. Can you hear us okay?
Hear you well.
Excellent. All right, I'm gonna try to share here in a sec. Probably just easier to do entire screen, I think. Are you seeing my screen now?
Yes. Yes, and now we even see the presentation.
Excellent. That's the important part. Okay. Cool. And unfortunately, you're probably seeing picture-in-picture, right? So I'm gonna drop that out there.
Yeah, a little bit like that.
All right, excellent. Okay. Yeah, so as Carl said, we're coming to you from Rusutsu up in Hokkaido, Japan. As Carl mentioned, there's 4 of us here. I'm Josh.
Tamara.
And Chris and Lauren, I think, are online from the other room. Is that correct?
Yep, we're here.
Okay.
I'm Lauren.
Chris.
All right. And just a quick sort of, we give a summary, we'll show some pictures, and then we'll do some route discussion. I know there's been some interesting courses so far. But basically, I mean, maybe some of you have seen the news. Japan has pretty excellent snow coverage, feet and feet of snow. Although when we arrived, it was sort of warm and rainy. So it's basically been very fast and super crusty snow, but excellent coverage. So we're not really dodging, boulders and sticks and that sort of thing. We have plenty of snow. Up until this point, we've done, we had sort of some like a training period here. Then we've done the sprint and the pursuit. We have a rest day today, and then we've got the middle distance tomorrow, and then the team sprint on Friday. And as I look out the window right now, it is dumping snow. So we're expecting slightly different conditions for the races that we have left. So we'll talk about that when we talk about the courses here. But just a couple pictures here. So, I think for people in the US, we might be used to showing up to skier races and seeing 20, 30 people, and everybody has one pair of skis. So this picture up in the top left here is a picture of the shared wax area. There's, I think, about 100 athletes racing, and I would guess probably 400 pairs of skis. So you go down there any time of the day, and it's just, it's a zoo, skis everywhere, waxing, that sort of thing. So it's pretty impressive, the setup. If you ever make it to one of these races, definitely worth going and checking that out. Bottom left is a picture from one of the training courses, and that's the sort of the big central mountain in the area. So all of the courses are sort of around this large mountain, but it's visible sort of from all the main courses. So very picturesque. You can see plenty of snow. And the right picture there is all 4 of us on the team at one of the training races, and it was at an amusement park. So you can see these roller coasters. So we were basically going in and out of roller coasters. It was actually on the side of the ski resort as well. So we had a big climb. So I sort of made the joke that it was like these roller coaster descents on, in through around roller coasters. So a lot of fun. But you can see just tons of snow. And I'll just give a quick overview of the sprint, and then Tamara's going to talk through some route selections. But the first day of competition was a sprint. Pretty standard individual start sprint, no forking. It was a section sort of in with narrow tracks going through a forest that then transitioned into a pretty wide open golf course that had steep open areas, fairly dense trails, and then sort of, stands of trees as you would expect at any golf course. Conditions were pretty hard and icy on the narrow trails, and that's been a theme basically through all our time here. The wide tracks were a little bit softer, so when you were skating, you were able to skate without having to deal with ice or hardness. But the big thing was that the off-trail sections are pretty crusty and skiable. So that means that shortcutting has been fast, both up and down. And as we go into the route discussions, we don't have live locks for these events, so there's a lot of hand-drawn routes, so you'll have to sort of excuse the Microsoft Paint drawings here. But I'll hand it over to Tamara to chat through this.
Yeah, so we had the women's sprint and the men's sprint had the same start to the first control. And we often get the advice to, go a little bit slower to the first control. But in this instance, that was the entire course. You were skiing all the way across. But I'll go through and show some of the fastest leg and some of the other route options. So this red and blue, which is the next one, had the same, about the same time to get to the course. But at the very start, it was tricky. You're just double poling on some icy single track, and you didn't really have a lot of time to like be able to get out and skate until you got into this area. And then you could skate off trail, and that was really comfortable. And then this cyan kind of came up the golf courses, and then this was my route. And then the interesting thing was on the sprint day specifically, they had 2 compulsory tracks. So this is orange here and then orange here. And once you're on the track, you can't escape it. And that was my big mistake. I went on the track and immediately skied off it because it was scary single track. And my brain was like, don't do that. And I had to circle back because there was an official standing right there, watching you to make sure that once you enter that course, you have to stay on it. And finish times for that whole course were, I think, 12 minutes for women.
About 15.
15,
yeah.
okay. And then men were 17?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And then, my big takeaway was, difficult to have a moment to read the map at the first leg. And just having to cross the entire course was, a bit of a challenge, but definitely very fun.
Yeah, I think just to add on to that, since we did have the same first leg, and Chris, you can jump in as well. My take on this was they sort of threw you in fast with these initial trails. So you sort of had to make a very quick split-second decision whether you were going down and through the climbing up the golf course on the Cyan, or whether you're going around and up to the north there. And really all you had to go on was this tiny little warm-up area where you're trying to figure out what conditions are. So if conditions were different on the golf course, it was sort of, you had made the selection to already, need to shortcut, say, on the Cyan route. And luckily it was fine. I think, in this particular case, being able to go uphill was shortcut uphill was fine, but that's definitely not always the case as we understand it in ski orienteering. So maybe a little bit unique conditions. Chris, Lauren, anything you have to say about this particular course before we go on to the next one?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a similar theme for both days, but what's been interesting, mentioning the icy snowmobile tracks, a lot of the times it was, a lot of the time the skiing was easier where they hadn't groomed it, and maybe faster as well. So like shortcutting might actually be faster than following the groomed trails, which is highly abnormal. The only exception to that is a lot of the places in the woods where the trails go through. There's a lot of river gullies and steep sections. So if you were to shortcut, the main problem would be the snowmobile trail would go through places where you weren't going to fall in a hole. Whereas if you went to shortcut, who knows what you're going to find.
Yeah, for sure. They warned us about that. Definitely be careful of the rivers. It's interesting. It's almost like getting to Footo where you're having to be a lot more careful of the terrain than I'm used to being for the domestic ski races that I've done. Anyway, I know we're a little bit pressed for time, so let's go into the pursuit. So pursuit's a little odd. Basically, the winner of the sprint starts first, and then everybody else chases that winner starting at the time back from the sprint. So essentially, whoever wins the sprint has an advantage going into the pursuit, and then first across the line wins. So this course was 2 forked loops with then a shared sort of finish loop that went to the actual finish line. This was extremely mountainous, narrow tracks. I think the only way I can describe it is like alpine glade skiing with maybe not quite as dense trees as we see on the East Coast, but still a lot of trees. Only about a quarter of it was wide tracks, and the men's course, I think, had about 1,000 meters of elevation gain. It was very hard and very icy on the narrow tracks, and they were very bumpy, so your skis would get caught in them. And the off trail was hard crust early, but it transitioned later to be quite a bit softer. So it was easy off trail. So essentially it was always faster to climb, almost always faster to climb and safer to descend when you were off trail rather than staying on the trails. So this is, again, the first loop. And the theme was they sort of toss you in with a lot of decision making to do very quickly. And just to sort of go through maybe the most obvious routes or variations on this red route. So there's sort of another one just up to the north where you could sort of, follow these narrow tracks down and stay as close to sort of the, crow flies straight line as you can. So the fastest times were basically along this road about, 7.5, 8 minutes. This is the day's winner, his route. There's also another route that you could do. You see this very wide skating trail over here. So essentially what this is doing is sort of staying high, descending down to this double track and then having to climb back up to the first control. But you're sort of avoiding some of the very, very dangerous, very fast ice that was or hard conditions on the snow machine tracks. A maybe less obvious route was, instead of going through the mountains, to just follow the double track, the wide track, all the way around. And it seems like this might be slow, and it was slower. So you can see down on the bottom there of the times, it was about a minute slower than maybe a minute and 45 slower than the very fastest. But I'm going to put my time up here to shame myself a little bit. I tried to do sort of a variation on the staying high and going on the icy hard tracks, and I lost about 4 minutes to that orange track, and that was just due to me being less comfortable with this sort of very technical hard descending. So I think from my perspective, the takeaway here, and just to put in perspective, red and blue had roughly equivalent finishing times, and my route was my finishing time was roughly equivalent to the person that chose the orange route. So I think in retrospect, it would have been much better for me to take this orange route, to give myself some extra time to read the map on this very long gradual descent, figure out the whole rest of this map, and essentially go faster rather than having to deal with this super scary off-trail descending. So the takeaway here is know your weaknesses and know the conditions. They might strongly influence your route selection. Chris, anything to say about this briefly?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just because you kind of buzzed over it, the actual fastest times were kind of just traversing very close to the straight line, kind of like sitting up above the river gully that goes down. And then getting on a ridge and then dropping down. Which is a route similar to what I attempted to do, but like Josh, lost many minutes in just not being quite as willing to go fast through highly technical terrain as these guys are.
And to put it in perspective, we strongly suspect that the reason this is hashed out in the middle there is because it's steep enough that avalanches were a potential danger if there was more snow. So that gives you an idea of how steep this was. Yeah,
I definitely saw places that were not that hashed out area where slides had occurred sometime this week.
Yeah. Okay, so what's next? Middle distances tomorrow. We're expecting less elevation gain, much more intricate navigation, and there'll be like 4 to 8 inches of new snow. So shortcutting will be less important. And then the team sprint, we might have more snow again, but we're planning to field 2 teams in that event. So Carl, I think that's all we had. I know you wanted to leave some time for questions. Hopefully we got through that quickly enough. And
so thanks very much. Very interesting to see some thoughts about route choice, especially in these very complicated steep areas. Ski orienteering has really varied terrains, and would like to mention that 3 of the 4 athletes that we have there, that is everyone but Chris, is actually racing for the first time in the international races. I'm hearing myself. I'm not quite sure why. Maybe someone has a speaker on that shouldn't. In any case, there's some questions for the team. Boris?
Yeah, hi. First of all, thank you for taking the time to talk to us. I think that's really, really cool. And good luck in the rest of the races. I guess the question I have is, I get the impression that this area was the host of the World Skills Games like 16 years ago. Did you guys study the map, and did that give an advantage with respect to thinking about routes and kind of?
Adrian, can you mute, please? We're getting feedback from your mic.
What?
We're all set now. It was Adrian's mic that was on.
Okay.
Go on, Boris.
Yeah, so I'm curious if like the map study of the previous maps helped with route choices, or if like the conditions on the day are just such an overwhelming factor that it kind of throws all the previous knowledge out the window.
Chris, you want to take this one? I know you
Yeah.
were.
Yeah, so we definitely studied the maps some for the previous ones. We were primarily looking at them in the context of kind of the way that ski orienteering usually goes, where you primarily follow the trails and then maybe take little shortcuts here and there. So at least for me, the way that we were taking routes yesterday was drastically different than anything I had really done before. So yes, we got some out of studying the maps, but you know, there's different trails, different setup. You don't know exactly where you're going. And, you know, it seemed like for yesterday, what would have been useful is to have like basically tried to like more or less memorize like the contour stuff ahead of time. And at least I did not get that far. But certainly we knew there was going to be big elevation gains and interesting stuff in that region. I think also we were further up the hill for the majority of yesterday than the previous time had gone. So we had a bit more of that ridge stuff than was done last time.
I think from my perspective, the helpful thing was sort of, you know, we knew the embargo areas and we knew that those maps were in that area, and just mentally preparing, like we saw 1,000 meters of elevation gain, mentally preparing yourself for like, we're going to be doing some hairy descending. And I need to know like right from the start that that's going to influence my route choices. I maybe didn't lean quite far enough into that, but it was definitely helpful to know like it's going to be hairy descending, pick skis based on that sort of thing.
Okay, we can take one more question, then we need to move on. Someone else? Well, if not, I'd like to wish you all good luck on the remaining races. I think it's been a good start, especially in the sprint. We had quite consistent results from the team, and looking forward to seeing how things go in the next 2 days. So next up is me explaining a little bit about some tips for doing ski orienteering. Just 1 second here. There we go. So hopefully you can now see my screen. This is just to show you that ski orienteering can have very different types of maps. Here's a very complicated map from Junior World Championships some years ago, very dense network of trails. Of course, route choice then becomes a little more less important, and execution becomes more important. And we also see things like this, which is a World Cup race from Finland some years back, which is more similar to what we just saw in Japan, with more larger trails and route choice becoming really important. Would like to just mention a few words about equipment for people who are new to ski orienteering. Really important to have a map holder, something that goes around your chest, like the picture at the bottom right. In the US, you can get them at Berman Orienteering Supply, which is a sponsor of the US ski orienteering team. Also really important to get larger baskets for your ski poles, especially as baskets start to get really, really small with more modern poles. These are just sort of useless in very soft snow. So get yourself some bigger baskets. And normally you use poles that are about 2.5 centimeters shorter or the same length as your skating poles in cross-country skiing. And skis are about the same length, or maybe 2.5 centimeters shorter. I would also like to mention it's an exciting time for US ski orienteering. We're starting to try to grow, and we actually are growing and getting some better results. Last year at European Youth Championships, we had a 5th, 6th, and a 6th in individual races. The relay team got 6th. This year, we were excited to have 5th place in the relay, which is tied for the best result that the US has ever had. And it was a real team effort with all three skiers skiing sort of 110% of their ability. That was Yul Brown, Mark Fey, and Espen Chitty. And we've also had some good races in domestic European and US, rather good results in domestic European and US results. Having, for example, in Norway, team members getting second in the Norwegian Cup in M20, and also winning in the medium distance there. We have started something called Program Accelerate 2033, which is having a goal by 2033 to have 2 people from the US in the top 10 in World Championships. We recognize that you can't become a great ski orienteer in a day, a year, or even a couple years, and so we set a little longer perspective for that. And step by step, we're working towards this. And we appreciate those of you who have donated to try to support that program, which has been really helpful for the team this year. Now, I'd just like to mention a few things, a few tips about ski orienteering. The first is that it's really important that you have a system of how you're going to orienteer and not just sort of be doing things ad hoc. So you want to, think, okay, I'm going to look frequently at the map. I'm going to not just be saying left, right, left, but looking around and seeing where the woods are. I'm checking my compass also. Have a system of what you're going to do. When you get to control, before you go in, you're going to know where you're going to go out. You know when you come to control, you're always punching first, not grabbing that glass of water, which might be there if it's an equipment, or rather a drinking control. So have a system that you follow is a really important thing. Second, really important to frequently look at your map. There's a tendency, especially when things, of course, get very hairy in the skiing, you might just look every couple minutes, and that's where you start to make mistakes. So look every 15 to 30 seconds for a shorter period of time is really important. Mental preparation is also really critical. I like to think about what I want to avoid, as well as what is a good race going to look like. Trying to get into the flow can be something that's really important. What I mean by that, of course, is that if you can get the first control right, and get the confidence that you know what's coming next when you turn right, you know where you're going, you find the control, etc. This can really help you to be able to go forward with confidence. So I generally do recommend going to the first control a little bit slower. Really can be helpful in ski orienteering if you're trying to gain seconds to accelerate through turns. So don't just try to go sort of slowly around the turn, but as you're going through the turn, try to speed up. This is something that can really help. There are some different techniques in skiing and ski orienteering compared to skiing and cross-country skiing. One is that you often, when double poling, will try to kick back with one leg a little bit. Keep in mind you don't have any kick wax on your skis, but that action of kicking with your leg back helps propel you forward, and that can be really helpful and important, especially if it's a little bit of an uphill, since again you don't have any kick wax. Also important to get your hips forward a lot when you're double poling. This is much more important in ski orienteering than in skiing, where your body weight is what's sort of propelling you forward. And finally, years ago, when skating first came out, people did what's called marathon skating. That's when you're skating with just one foot. Because ski orienteering and the dash trails, which are often the majority of trails on a map, are so narrow that you can't skate in them, you occasionally can get in a marathon skate. And so practicing some marathon skating is really important, and not getting just, it's easy to say in advance, I'm going to do all this marathon skating, but often what we find is you get into a race and it's easy just to be double poling, but try to concentrate on putting in those extra marathon skates from time to time. That can be a lot faster. Moving on, would also like to, sorry, let's see if we can go, there we go. It's important not just to count intersections, but read other things in the map like buildings, swamps, open areas, etc. And it's also important to remember when you're choosing your route choice, especially if a control is going to be on a downhill, but always, that if you could go through the control rather than having to turn around, you'll probably save about 10 seconds each time. So think about that in the route choice. Can you come into the control one way, out the other way? Also, we hope you're never going to get lost. You shouldn't, but people do get lost sometimes. And so if you get lost, what should you do? I would say, look at your compass and look at the map and see if there's sort of a direction that you can bail out if you can't figure out where you are from just looking at a compass and maybe some sort of intersection. So what would you do? Look for some large object like a swamp, a lake, a skating trail, a road that you can ski towards if you sort of go in a more or less north direction. Of course, the problem in ski orienteering is trails can bend and so forth, sometimes a little bit tricky. But anyway, that's the general thing to try to do. Critically important is you need to try to ski on a map or with a map at least once a week in training for ski orienteering. In the US, we don't always have a place you can ski on a good ski orienteering map once a week. And so a good thing is just to ski with a map from anywhere and just pretend that you're skiing that. Another thing that you can do is what we call batongo, which you see here, is you can just make a circle, like you can think of like a track, a running track, and with two lines across it. This could be in an open field, on a golf course, whatever. And you can practice going around this like you're reading a map. So when you come to an intersection, okay, should I turn left? Should I turn right? So you just take a map from anywhere. In this case, it would be a map that ideally you would have only three-way intersections on, but you can just sort of forget about one intersection if you have some four-way ones, and just practice skiing around this. So that can be really, really helpful. Finally, as we've seen from Japan, practice downhill ski orienteering. You can go to a downhill area or some big hill, practice jumping some, ski on snowmobile trails, because the balance and the technical skills in ski orienteering is much more difficult than in normal skiing, and so you really need to work on that. So these are just a couple tips that I wanted to share with people about ski orienteering. Any questions before we move on to our next segment? Okay, if not, then would like to turn over to Adrian Owens, who, as I mentioned, has organized a World Cup ski orienteering race and World Masters in Craftsbury, Vermont, a few years back, and also done a lot of local races. And since some of you I know are trying to grow your programs or even organize ski orienteering for the first time, I've asked Adrian to put together a few tips based on his experience about how to put together a ski orienteering race, what to do and what to avoid. Adrian, over to you. Adrian, we can't hear you at the moment. You're muted still.
Trying to get my sharing up here.
We see lots of things on your screen at the moment.
Yeah, I'm still working on it.
Looks beautiful
All
now.
right. Can you hear what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we're trying to create a successful race event, and it's a ski event's going to have all the things that a photo meet would need. Venue permission, mapping, although that can be simpler with Skio, I find, parking, toilets, advertising, pre-registration, all this stuff. And so this is showing you some of the elements on this map, the base map was the same one we used for the World Cup races. It's going to have contour lines, lakes, streams, marshes, and then kind of the fields versus woods, buildings, the ski trails, and then kind of danger things, roads, cliffs, and a few biathlon ranges in this case. So that's basically the only elements on this map. Maybe there's one boulder cluster up here that was mapped because of a big obvious pile of rocks. But there's very few other, it's nothing like a photo map, I should say, as far as the time it takes to make something like this up. But some of the ski orienteering specific things you'll need to be look at is weather forecasts and whether changes the courses or cancellation. With often you're waiting till maybe 2 or 3 days ahead of time for those decisions. You have good close communication with trail groomers. And so this is the bulk of the presentation is on what's outlined on this slide. Adding extra small trails and knowing if off-trail skiing is allowed. I'll talk a little bit about a few course setting tips, control placement, road crossings, and the ideas of really having some indoor sheltered space if at all possible, and having a first aid response plan. So having that accurate map depends on knowing which trails will be groomed. I think I'll probably, Boris, I know it's kind of a daily thing. Like you show up, you know you were there the day before, you checked your maps, and then you show up and they've groomed a new trail, or they haven't groomed something they said they were going to groom. So that's one of the things. So kind of talking with your groomers as much as possible to reduce those problems. Mapping in any other existing trails or skiable roads, and deciding whether there's going to be dashed trails or dotted trails, depending on their width and skiability. The groomers might have kind of a regular pattern, weekend pattern that's different from their weekdays. And the other thing, my other piece of advice is bringing a good stock of colored pens or markers to modify maps if you need to along the way, or at least make a kind of here's some last minute changes that you noticed. So this is an example that I think Chris and Josh will recognize from a little relay training we did. But you can see the wide trails kind of in this field here. Is basically, sort of just a figure eight, with maybe one extra little bit of trail here, a trail loop. But by adding some extra trails, if you take a route choice, say from control 2 to control 3, you kind of doubled the complexity of the choice here, where if this hadn't, this becomes the short trail becomes the best viable choice, this is still possible since you wouldn't have to turn around going through there. So you had to have like which way to go around that section and which way to go around this loop. Gives you quite a bit more options, and then you still have the shortcut across the field option depending on the snow conditions.
Adrian, just to mention that, ideally one would put in those dash trails with a snowmobile, but sometimes in the US, people put them in and even sometimes mark them as dotted trails with snowshoes. So, I mean, it can be done in a simpler way, right, than, having to necessarily have access to a grooming machine.
Yeah, it depends on your definition of simple, but yes, you can do it with, like say, hand tools in my world. I like snowshoes to do a lot. But the reason to do this, so you can increase the route choices, the visual complexity, decision making, the speed of decision making that's required. So, and also gets the controls off of the main ski trails, which may be an advantage if you've got a lot of skier traffic, recreational skier traffic while you're racing. And it's really important for any kind of preparing racers for international competition. So yeah, talking about snowshoes, I do it mostly with snowshoes. And even if you are going to use a snowmobile, I would call it best practice to snowshoe out your trails ahead of time. I've had plenty of snowmobiles like get wallowed in deep snow, and have to do a lot of shoveling, packing to get them out. But packing ahead of time will reduce that. If you are doing with snowshoes, the goal is to try to make, the main thing for me is trying to make the trails firm enough for your poles don't sink totally out of sight. And that makes the trails effective to be used, better than just having no trail at all. But it also distinguishes the map trail from random shortcuts. So packing it at least twice I find on different days with snowshoes, and then once with skis. And that, if you can do some of your first packing when it's the warmest, you're kind of managing how to make it firm but not icy. So if you're way above freezing, you might hold off until you have something that's below freezing to do your packing. So for a dash trail, I'm aiming for, say 1 up to 1.5 meters wide. I think that's kind of the standard definition for the dash trails, which will take like 3 snowshoe passes wide. or that would also be about 1 snowmobile width. Dotted trails, sometimes single snowshoes. I've seen them put in. I don't like it, but sometimes just a single set of ski tracks, but that's really, you miss out on being able to distinguish that map trail from just someone skiing through the woods or through a field. Making new trails in a field is super easy as long as you have permission to do that. For the 2018 World Cup, I was scouting and clearing trails for 1.5 years beforehand, because I probably did 10 miles of trail, maybe more than that. Okay, so on to some course setting tips here. One of the things you want to do safety-wise is reduce the chance of head-on traffic on steep, narrow trails. So there's, I've experienced plenty of bad instances where I'm tearing down a trail and someone's coming up something that's only, a meter and a half wide. And even though I would theoretically, on someone's coming up, I would theoretically have the right of way. If they're splayed out in the middle of the trail and can't move, I end up having to bail off into the soft snow and crash. And so even if it's really you should be able to course set to avoid that happening for most of the racers, rather than have a whole train of people, 2 trains crashing into each other. And you can't control everywhere where a skier goes in Skio, but at least the best route shouldn't be creating head-on traffic. And I like to avoid road crossings if at all possible. If they are necessary, and this is just a safety at the road crossing, concentrating to just 1 or 2 crossings so you can have a crossing guard and have some warning signs on the road. In extreme cases, you can close roads, which would be, if you're having a international level race, that would be a good idea. Okay, and control marker placement. So this is maybe getting some of my pet peeves. You do want to get them off to the side of big trails so they're not hit by grooming machines. So they're basically going to be in ungroomed terrain. But you want to make a good effort as the person setting out controls to really compact, stomp down snow about 6 feet around the control, so the skiers don't get in and flounder. And then if you have a close race or people coming to the same time, you're going to be able to get people in and out of that control and not interfere with each other as much. So you're making a fairer race by doing that. And it's kind of in the kind of advanced courses, you want to be trying to make your route choices complex enough to be interesting, rather than just kind of a which way do I go around the loop, right or left. And Boris, you did great on this and on all the courses I skied out in Montana. Other thing I like, what I kind of keep in mind as a course setter, that some of the controls skiing straight through, as Carl said, where you're saving that 10 seconds is going to be the best route. Other times I try to kind of purposely make the best route to be having to force people to turn around to find that shorter route to the next control. And I think because shortcutting is part of the sport, off trail, having at least one off trail shortcut being the fastest choice. Here's an example, and hopefully no one who set this course is on the call here and sees this as any criticism, but I needed some examples to work with to show it some problems here. So from the start triangle down in the lower right, like this is Josh's LiveLox persona here. Going up to here, up to number 1, good complexity, going to 2, good complexity, 3, adequate complexity, getting there. And here you definitely had the best route choice, and it being up here, coming in a little bit off trail and then back down the same trail to get back out. This was a trail that was probably 30 feet wide, so there's having head-on traffic on a wide trail, even though it was a steep and fast, kind of icy, was not a problem at all. But as you follow the line out to number 4, good long distance route with a couple options. But basically the main option turned into people coming down this route, get to the control, turn around, and come back up. And on a dotted trail where skiers are not going to be in control down a steep hill, there was definitely the potential for crashes and people being out of control on that. So you see, I put in some big red dots as kind of alternate kind of things. Either you could move the 4th control, or you could have a preliminary control, say, roughly somewhere in this area. Maybe it's on a snowshoe trail, maybe it's some, to set people up. Or if you put a control here, you'd kind of have more of a one-way flow going through those dotted trails. It's a steep enough hill there that would become an option. The other thing and we ended up having, there's a mispunch in this race, someone missing control 5, because for a couple of reasons. One is the lines go straight through, and so it's basically invisible, as well as the number being obscured in trails and a road there. Obviously, we know to count from 4 to 6, you should look for something in between. But the other setup here is looking at kind of you can see the road at the north end of the map here. The leg that goes from 7 to 8 is really kind of moving people to this side of the trail system, so they can use a tunnel to go under the road. On this particular version of the map, this road is not X'd out, although in reality the race map had this being X'd out. But in this case, it would look as if you could cross anywhere, but they're trying to direct people to the bridge and the tunnel to have safe road crossings. So the final bit of this is planning some indoor or sheltered space. It makes it a lot nicer for race volunteers and racers if you're having any kind of inclement weather. And it makes it more conducive to community building for post-race conversations, if it's comfortable to hang out rather than just run for your car, so you don't die. And having a first aid response plan for SKIO is important. Cold weather makes any kind of quick evacuation of someone who's immobile really important. And because hurt legs, knees, someone can become incapacitated a lot more quickly if they have skis on. It's easier to twist things. So ideally, having a snowmobile with a rescue sled attached on call at a lot of the ski areas are possible. It's not possible everywhere. So if I was doing this place without snowmobile support, I would bring a big plastic toboggan to make some way to be able to move people on the snow. One of the worst one I had to deal with at one of my meets was someone fell on a relatively flat, icy trail. They just slipped and fell and broke their femur, and they needed evacuation. That's something you wouldn't want to do without a splint. You wouldn't want to get someone to try to walk out on that at all. All right, so I can stop sharing and see what kind of questions we have.
Okay, just very briefly, 1 or 2 questions from anyone?
I'll jump in. I'm curious, is Meso a thing in SKIO? Either for just as a training tool or as an actual thing people do for fun as an event?
Yeah, I've seen it at international level races, small mazes. I haven't seen it in the US. I've seen it as a training on foot in the US. And yeah, I guess right at the Boston North End race, there was a little Meso section in there.
Oh yeah, I can't help thinking you could draw if you had an unused but snow-covered football field or whatever nearby. You
So
could lay out some
one thing
tracks
one can
and
do, John, is one can use snow fences if you have, for example, a start finish area that you often have that is a big field, and make more complex areas. And there's a set of symbols for those. And for example, last year at the World Cup races in Germany that Chris, among others, was at. They did have a little section like that. So it can add some additional complexity. It is something that's sometimes used, and I think would be a great thing for the US, where, grooming is a little more difficult than in huge races in Europe.
Yep. And I mean, the other thing that I've seen, I believe this was at Skio Tour like 2013. They had a a section of a longer race, and they had kind of an inset in one corner, so you could, even though the maze itself, might kind of almost individual lanes might almost disappear on a big map if you're trying to draw a line. They had a blown up inset at a much larger scale.
Any other questions?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment that if anybody's like really excited about putting one on, I think it's worth getting in touch with one of us to sort of talk through skinny trail strategy, either Adrian or Boris or myself, because there's a lot of nuance to it, and you can waste a lot of time trying to put a lot of skinny trails in, and then things happen. So it's worth reaching out, and I'm sure we're all happy to talk.
So that was Chris Chitty who's talking, and he's a groomer out in Montana who did a great job with some interesting preparation for the races that they had this year. I think we need to move on, though. Would like to thank Adrian very much for a really informative presentation. And those of us who were at the 2018 races really enjoyed them. We're next going to move to Boris Granovsky from Grizzly Orienteering to talk about how you can develop ski orienteering activity in an old club in the US. And they've done a great job of that, and I hope others will follow. We've also seen increased activity this year from the Twin Cities, also from Alaska, and continuing activity in New York State and New England, especially Vermont. So Boris, thanks for making time to be with us today just after your club's training. Over to you, Boris. And I'm sorry, everyone, we will be going about 10 minutes late today.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. And I'll try to be quick, and I appreciate the introduction and just the opportunity to talk. And I don't know that we've succeeded in establishing Skio in Montana, but we've made a little bit of progress. So here on the slide in the lower left, you see young Liam and Ewell Brown at their first ever ski orienteering event back in 2022. And on the picture on the bottom right, there they are in Team USA uniforms racing at Junior Worlds earlier this year. So I think that's pretty cool. So yeah, we are Grizzly Orienteering based in Missoula, Montana. We're a pretty young orienteering club. Started in the fall of 2020 when my wife and I moved here. For those who don't know, we average about 15 events a year and have about 120 club members. Because we got snow, it was sort of a natural thing for me to start dabbling in Skio a little bit. I don't come from a Skio background, so I'm sort of making things up as I go along. But I was pretty encouraged early on because we made contact with the Missoula Nordic Ski Club, and at the very least, the club was willing to advertise our events through their mailing list. And it's a pretty big mailing list. I don't know how many members they have, but certainly in the hundreds. And we also very quickly made a connection with the local youth Nordic skiing program for the Ice Badgers. And I think through those two connections, we've been able to make quite a bit of progress. As you can see, our numbers of Skio events are not huge. We average about one a month during a winter, and if we have a bad winter, it can be fewer than that. This winter we've had 3 events, but they were all in a single weekend, and it's essentially been the only weekend that we've been able to ski anywhere near Missoula. The events aren't huge; they're 30 to 50. But one thing that I think has seemed promising to me is that compared to even our attendance at photo events, the attendance has skewed towards the younger demographics. We've been able to get families out and families with kids out, and I think that's in large part, due to this connection with the Ice Badgers. Also, I shouldn't neglect, I mentioned Liam and Eula Brown. They come from, the Kalispell Whitefish area, which is over 2 hours away from us, but they've been making the trips down to our events and also kind of, bringing the average age down. So what have we done, and how has this been helpful from kind of a photo perspective? Because that's kind of the angle that Carl wanted me to talk at. So the most obvious crossover has been that folks who come to Skio events, if they have fun at Skio, they're likely going to have fun at Footo as well. And so we've had a number of people here who I think tried Skio first, and have crossed over to Footo and have become very active club members and volunteers, which of course is exactly the kind of thing that you want, with respect to club growth. Just having the good connection with the local ski club also helps, because they will advertise our Skio events. They will also advertise our Footo events, our, youth training program, and things like that. Similarly, the connection with the Ice Badgers, basically every season we're asked to put on at least one, either Footo or Skio for the youth program. That not only gets our name out there, it makes the thing that we do seem just a little bit less weird and esoteric than it is, because it's no longer just like this abstract orienteering thing that we go out and do. It's something that now hundreds of kids in town have tried, and so it's gotten to the point where at least most skiers know what orienteering is and know what ski orienteering is. And so if they're exposed to it a couple of times and they like it, they're much more likely to come to our events and much more likely to come to our youth program. And of course, it's also yielded results. 2 years ago, I saw an email from Carl Fey saying, hey, we have this, this money for a youth team to go to Finland and race. And we just need some kids. And I said, well, we have kids who know how to ski. And I replied. And so now we've grown to 4 Grizzle members traveling to Sweden. And I think it's starting to feel enough like a thing that I'm hoping that it kind of snowballs a little bit, that more kids want to do it, because, that's the only way you're going to get young people in the sport, if they see other people, if they have fun. Because if you're the only kid out there doing this weird sport, you're not going to stick with it very long unless you have a personality that's out there, like perhaps many of us here. Maps, venues, and permits. So first of all, as Adrian was saying, we largely use areas that already groom trails for cross-country skiing. We typically don't reinvent the wheel on that. There are exceptions. So the map that you see in the upper right-hand corner is a map that we used for our training/racing weekend in January. This came about because we had a guy in the club who said, hey, I have this property that has snow when there's absolutely no snow in town. Do you guys want to come and make some trails? Conveniently, Chris Chitty, who's on this call and also shown on the groomer there, said yes. And so Chris and I spent a few days out there in the days before the event, designing a trail network absolutely from scratch, putting in a network of wide trails and then putting in a network of narrow trails to make for a fun Skio venue. Obviously, this is a whole lot of good luck, having a guy who's willing to let us use their land and having someone in the club who is willing to do the grooming for us. But clearly, if you make connections like that, it helps a lot. That's not typical. This is not a typical experience, but the much more typical experience is that we use areas that are already Footo maps. The one thing that I found, as Adrian was saying, making a Skio map is much, much easier than making a Footo map. And converting from a Footo map to a Skio map is extremely easy. It takes half an hour and then like one quick field check, essentially. The biggest part of the process, and again, Adrian talked about this, so I'm not going to kind of go deeply into this, but good communication with landowners, with groomers, know who uses the areas and communicate with them. Goodwill generates publicity, generates people who are not pissed off at you when you're skiing on their trails with weird map holders. And this might look like, if you see, a call in November for going and clearing your local Nordic trails from a windstorm, you show up. You go in, you put in the hours, you put in the face time, because people are much more likely to give you permits, to be encouraging and supportive of the things that you're organizing, if they see that, you're a real person, you're willing to put in the work, and that what you're doing is a cool thing. So yeah, let's see. Oh yeah, so this was I want to show a slide about a conversion from Footo to Skio. So this is Lubrecht Forest, which is one of our better Footo areas. It took me one afternoon to convert it from a Footo map to a Skio map, and it is really very easy to do. So if that's a barrier to entry for folks who are thinking about starting up a Skio program, you know, I would not see that as a major obstacle. We do, however, have obstacles. This is not kind of a perfect world. So, like, you know, what are we doing? How are we planning about this? It was a lot of fun hosting a Skio weekend, and we got a lot of folks who are on this call from all over the country. So I think, you know, we have an ambition to kind of do that, make that into a thing, and ideally have a couple of racing days besides that each winter. One question that I always think about is how do we get young athletes, in particular, how do we get them to come over from skiing, from regular skiing into Skio? And one huge carrot here is that the path to the national team is a lot easier than it is for skiing. And for some kids, that is a cool motivator. You know, you might be the 20th best skier in the country or the 60th best skier in the country, and you will never race at international level. But you can immediately switch over to Skio and become, you know, a national team member. And that is a great carrot that I hope that you know, Carl and the Skio program continues to use as an opportunity. And then how do you get these folks to do Footo? Well, it's very easy to show that Footo is a great way to train for Skio during the summer. And you get folks to come out to your Footo events and they become hooked on Footo as well. Because if you are liking Skio, probably you're going to like Footo as well. Obviously not always. Challenges, there are lots of these, you know, as everyone's experiencing at one time or another lack of snow. We've had to cancel 2 Skio events this winter and switch one into Footo. There's just not much we can do about that. New areas, you know, if we're using the same 3-4 Skio areas over and over, it gets boring. So trying to find new areas means longer driving times, means going further afoot. So that's a challenge. Another big one, and this is something that I really struggled with thinking about how can we help our local kids prepare for these international races, is narrow trails. You know, when Carl was showing those maps from Sweden, Finland, there are networks of trails with the kind of density that we don't come close to reproducing here. And that's a stumbling block in many of the areas we use because people feel weird about us adding narrow trails. And that's something that I've not solved yet. You know, obviously using people's private land is one way to solve that, but that's not going to be a magic bullet. And then, of course, the other one is, you know, competition with the existing ski racing calendar. You know, we were sort of all set to have a full relay team's worth of girls going to Junior Worlds from Missoula, and 2 of them decided to prioritize their ski racing over their Skio, and you can't really blame them for that. And that's something where you need that snowball effect, right? You need to make it seem fun and cool and have a group of kids who are interested in going to make it feel more like a real sport and something they want to use their time on. But, you know, it happens. And at the bottom here, you have Caroline, you see her racing in Skio at the Junior Worlds this year and also in Footo up in Canada earlier. So I do think that for clubs who are thinking about the connection between Skio and Footo, it definitely exists. There's a lot of crossover and a lot of overlap, and opportunities go in both directions. I said a ton of things. I know we're over time, so I will stop here. Just a huge shout out to both the Browns and the Chitties for kind of agreeing to the crazy idea of sending their children to Scandinavia to do something that they were not quite certain what it was, and coming back with awesome stories and great performances. Yeah. Anyone have any questions?
I'd just like to mention 1 or 2 things to add on here. Big thanks to Boris and Grizzly for all they've done to develop ski orienteering in the US. It's been a great example. This past year, as Boris mentioned, they organized a Skio weekend. I'd like to add a couple things they did, I think, that were really great with that. One is that they added night Skio the first night, which is actually the map you saw that they had made. And so having 3 races rather than 2 races really helped attract some people from other parts of the country, I think. A second thing is Boris was kind enough to throw a nice pizza dinner at his house on Saturday night. And I've heard more good stories about that than other things. So you can really get, some additional mileage without, it doesn't have to be a fancy banquet at a big restaurant, but a couple boxes of pizza can really help build a good community. The third thing is I suggested I'd really like to have a bit of a training camp at races at this weekend. Ideally we might have it some other time, but it's hard to get the networks, hard to get people together. And so we had a junior team training camp, after the races on some of the days. And Adrian was kind enough to go out there and organize that. Really appreciate that. And, since you do need to have a Skio network to do the ideal training, probably, staying a day after a race is a great way for training, or doing things in the afternoons with school and other commitments, making it difficult sometimes to stay a day after. But I hope we'll see more places like Grizzly developing things, and we're starting to see that with some other areas. And I think this is a great example of how ski orienteering can grow. It's great to have a national team program, but it needs to start with the grassroots of growing more skio in the U.S. Some questions for Boris. Okay, if not, I know it's been a really fast-paced event, but I hope you've gotten a touch of a number of different things that are happening with Skio in the U.S. And would also like to end by wishing our national team over in Japan good luck in the remaining races. And for anyone on the call who's interested in getting more involved with the national team, feel free to reach out to me. John, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to talk a little about Skio this evening. I'll stay on call for a few minutes if anyone wants to ask anything else after this. And for the national team members in Japan, we'll have a call in our WhatsApp group in a few minutes after this.
Yeah, thanks, Carl, Boris, Adrian, team members in Japan. Good luck with the remaining racing.
Thanks.